another fantastic session. We have Ryan Eckel, and I will say that I think Ryan has by far one of the best bios that I've read. So he's going to win the bio competition. Ryan is the brand president at Tracksmith. Prior to joining Tracksmith just a year ago, Ryan was the VP of product development at Dick's Sporting Goods. Ryan was also the executive producer of the award-winning documentary We Could Be King, the Emmy-nominated film Keepers of the Game. So an impressive intro, Ryan. Jealous of that. Your session today is actually going to be moderated by Robert Gregory. He is the president of sales and marketing at Jellysmack. Jellysmack is a technology company that accurately predicts what kind of videos will perform best on social media and produces those videos for brands. So thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Rob, for joining us today. Looking forward to this next session. So over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Can you guys hear me okay? Ryan, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you. Yep.
You
can you hear me?
Okay. How are you? Nice to see you again.
Good to see you too.
Okay. You're still in a cabin in Maryland, as I recall.
Still avoiding urban environments best I can. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll jump right in. Your background is really impressive. I was going to add, in addition to all of that, your running origins and credibility are pretty blue chip. You ran varsity track at Yale, if I'm correct. And what were your events? Signature move.
I was a long distance guy. I was a mile and up, so I ran cross country. I ran the steeplechase was probably my main event.
The steeplechase, awesome.
Yeah, I wasn't good at any of them, but I tried.
Well, if you did it at Yale and were on the varsity, I'm sure you weren't bad. Let's jump right in and start. And by the way, I think we discussed the other day in our pre-call, I think since the theme this afternoon is sports and sports marketing, and you have experience at some other brands that are iconic and very famous, like Dick's Sporting Goods and Puma. I'd love to ask you from time to time as we chat to draw on that experience and maybe share some observations that would be valuable to the folks listening. Why don't we start off with Tracksmith, and if you could maybe describe its origins, its DNA, its reason for being, and what makes where the name comes from, and what makes Tracksmith different. That'd be a great place to start.
Yeah, so Tracksmith is a company that's about 6 years old, and it was started by a guy named Matt Taylor, who actually was a teammate of mine in college, and we worked together at Puma. And Matt's observation was that that no one is giving proper attention and love and care to apparel in the athletic industry. At some of the companies that we worked with, they were footwear led, so apparel was treated as an afterthought. And then within that, even running apparel was even more of a niche. There's those bigger companies are led by categories like general training and basketball, and the observation was, there's a lot of runners out there who are running. Nobody is really putting a lot of attention to the product. These runners also spend a lot of time in product, and they're super passionate, right? So they're spending hours and hours a week in shorts and shirts that are made with, they're okay, but there's a lot of room for improvement. So Matt started the company with just attention to detail around materials and construction and the little things that runners will know are important in products, and also just making them look a lot better than the industry had been doing it. There's a style component to it as well. And so when he launched, and the name, you asked about the name. I mean, it certainly comes from the combination of track, which is the roots of the company are in a lot of us are former track athletes, and we wanted to nod to the performance side of the sport, but also Smith is quality and craftsmanship, and I think most people are kind of familiar where that would come from. So and so the company started to gain a a very sort of small but loyal following, and that's only amplified in the past years and further accelerated in the past several months, with everybody being in lockdown and now getting outside more than they had in the past.
Yeah, good. That's a good segue to my next question. I know as a former, it's a long time ago, but as a former runner, fairly serious runners, run a couple of marathons. Even if there's a small defect in any item of clothing, it's after, in my case, almost 4 hours of movement. The effect of that can be amplified in very painful ways. So that meticulousness seems like it's really important. The more serious a runner you are.
Yeah. I think all marathon runners know about the benefits of strategically placed Band-Aids and Vaseline and all these things, which there's better solutions out there.
Yeah, all of those things. So I thought we'd start right off with I guess there are lots of elephants in the room these days, but just start off with COVID, and there's a silver lining in it. For sure, there's a fitness boom and a running boom. If I look out my front window, the last 3 or 4 months, I've seen more people running past my house than I've ever seen before, and it's it's very interesting. Just to do some research from the call, I was looking at some articles that one theory was this is arguably the third running boom. The first one was in the 1970s. When after Frank Shorter won the marathon in Munich, and Jim Fixx wrote his book, and there were other great writers and journalists and authors in the space, and Americans started buying running shoes, and Phil Knight was getting things going with Nike, and there was a big running boom. And then I guess there was another one around 2008, 2009, 2010, where the demographics surged again, and a lot of people, coming off the Great Recession, discovered the beauty of a sport that just requires a minimal amount of equipment and a road. And in some ways now there's a third boom because of COVID-19. On the other hand, you have the challenges of race cancellations. I think just yesterday or today, the Paris Marathon was canceled. Boston was canceled, which is holy ground for a brand like yours, I assume. And you have a lot of the community aspects of the sport, even smaller group runs, 10Ks, charity runs, the beta breakers, all of these things are canceled. So if you could start off talking about a little bit about this dichotomy, is how do you and your team take advantage of a surge of interest in the sport and a surge of activity, but so much of your marketing framework is suddenly impossible to predict?
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly, it's cliche to say these are unique times, I think, in running, but because of that dichotomy, they certainly are. In our brand we grew up sort of around the corner of the halfway point of the Boston Marathon. The Boston Marathon was almost a spiritual home for us in a lot of ways. Activation around the marathon was really important to the brand's growth back in the early days, and the marathon majors in general. I mean, they're part of that running. So I would even say that pre-COVID, there was the sort of the early signs of another running boom that were taking place. Marathons were becoming even more popular again. People are traveling around the world, or we're traveling around the world to run the marathon majors. There's 6 of them. So tourism was starting to become a part of it. Everyone who's run a marathon knows that there's exorbitant entry fees, so it's becoming a really, really big industry. And so the brand really leaned into those to help fuel its growth. We would do pop-ups in New York and London, and we had one plan this year for Tokyo, and those were really successful brand drivers for us. So yeah, we had to, once Tokyo was canceled in February, that was sort of the realization that we had to take a very different approach to this year. We certainly didn't know what was to come, which was that there would be that the world would go into lockdown, and that so many people would really take to the sport. So what really the way we're looking at it is sort of these almost 2 groups of runners. One, the people who are competitive runners who hold these marathons and other races too, right? It's not just marathons, but it's everything has been canceled. That those are really important measuring sticks for them throughout the year, and motivation, and and also there's a social component to it. And so for that group, we're just trying to give them other sides of the sport to look at, to stay motivated, to discover. For many people, they've been training really hard for years and years and years, and this is actually a moment to take your foot off the gas pedal, to kind of take a deep breath, relax a little bit, kind of wind down the type A part of your personality that most runners are sort of have hardwired into them. Go run trails, go run barefoot on a grass field like the New Zealanders do. Go leave your stopwatch at home, right? So we're trying to come up with ways to sort of help people stay in love with the sport and fall deeper in love with the sport, while also sort of helping them see that there's a lot of opportunity out there now, and in terms of just reconnecting with the sport and the reasons that maybe a lot of them got into the sport in the first place. So anyways, that's what we're doing with that group of kind of more race driven or performance driven runners. And then all the new people come into the sport. There's a lot who have come in through because their CrossFit gym is closed, or their rec soccer league isn't happening, or they just want to get out of the house and go see the neighborhood, and they've been stuck inside. And so with that group, we're really just trying to introduce them to us. We produce a lot of content, and so use our content to again help them fall in love with running. One of the things that we say is our mission is to help people fall in love with running, and so that's kind of the lens through which we're looking at both of those groups. But yeah, so
can you be a little bit more specific in terms of how you do it, like how you expand their thinking about the different ways they can approach their passion? How do you make videos? Do you do thought leadership? Are you using blogs? Are you using your social accounts? How are you actually getting this inspiration and these new points of view about the sport to either or both of these groups?
Yeah. The first thing we did was put together a little thing on Instagram we called Culture Club, which is just recommendations of podcasts and books and movies and really anything that would allow people to dive deeper into the sport and learn more about it and take this time of, a lot of us have, some of us, I don't have extra time. I have less time than I had before, but some people have more time to read. And we wanted to provide people with a curated list of materials that they could, films, books, anything that they could use to deep dive into the sport. We're doing sort of occasional Zoom calls with our kind of our core consumers. We have a membership club called Harry C, and we every couple of weeks we bring in really important voices in the sport, whether they're former Olympic medalists or former Boston Marathon champions or coaches or anybody who can add a perspective. And we try to gather that community together in a pretty intimate way. 20 to 30 people in a Zoom call. So enough that it scales a little bit, but not so much that it feels like you're just watching a webinar. So we've done that. We are continuing to produce our own content. We introduced a weekly newsletter called 100 Days of Summer, which is taking this idea of sort of summer running and introducing weekly things you could do to keep your running interesting while you don't really have races on the calendar. And so we're trying. It's an email. It's
once a week.
It is, yeah. And now we're trying to. There's a lot of virtual racing that's happening. We're trying to figure out how we could help make that a bit more interesting and a bit more engaging. We're still trying to figure it out. I think it's like every couple months, so you realize that you're in this for the longer haul. And so I think now we're trying to figure out how do we get people through winter, right? Winter's the whole, for us in the Northeast, which is where our company's based, it's brutal. I mean, if you come into running it's easy enough to get started in April, May, June, July, but then to keep it going through December, January, February, it's not easy. So we're trying to figure out how to keep people motivated through that season as well.
Yeah. Has the you mentioned podcasts. Has the podcast boom intersected with the running boom, and there are more people who are using that time to listen to podcasts?
Yeah, we find that our endemic podcasts, running specific podcasts, perform well for us. We advertise on a number of them, everything from revisionist history, and with Malcolm, which is Malcolm Gladwell's podcast, to the Daily and the New York Times, to like really sort of small niche running ones. Yeah, I mean, I think that medium is particularly interesting to runners. I think a lot of runners will run. It's a great way to get through a 90-minute run. So have somebody in your ear the entire time. So yeah, I think it's an interesting format for a lot of reasons, and as an advertiser, and I think for runners, it's a particularly good one. So yeah, we're playing around with some ideas there, and toyed with the idea of doing more on our own, creating more of our own content and our own podcasts in that space as well.
Malcolm Gladwell looks like a runner. I don't know if he is, but
He's
fit.
He's
at Tracksmith.
He's a yeah. So we were perusing the customer list a couple years ago and found his name kept popping up, and so we reached out to him and started a relationship. Yeah, so he's a very serious runner. He's I think trying to break 5 minutes for the mile.
Oh, wow!
He's in his 50s, right? So that's pretty good. That's pretty good for anybody, and particularly
that's super impressive.
Yeah, he's very, very serious, and more than that, he's just a massive fan of the sport. I mean, he's an encyclopedia of knowledge of the sport. So he's a great example of somebody who kind of represents sort of our values as a brand, but also has reach beyond just the kind of the core running community.
Yeah. So just going back to the not to sound corny, but it is. Having been around in the past and read a lot about it, and been into it for a while, I know there is a deep spirituality to the sport. It's almost like a religion to some people, in the way that fly fishing is and other things like that. All that comes with that, the authenticity, responsibility. We talked about this a little bit the other day. Is there, are there ground rules that you have to follow? Well, one side question I wanted to ask you again is, do runners, especially serious runners, feel an obligation to wear masks when they're running, or to socially distance themselves when they're running in the current environment and lead by example? And then related question, is there a broader set of ground rules or principles that you guys have to operate by, so that you don't hit a inauthentic sour note with hardcore runners?
Yeah. I mean, so our brand has been, defined by authenticity, and that's I mean, it's such a cliche term to speak about in the marketing world, but within running, it really wasn't. Running was not communicated in a way that felt real. It felt like it was either stylized or glorified or celebrating the pain, and most runners don't really celebrate the pain. They deal with it, and it's part of. Right. Yeah. So we do try to depict the sport in a way that feels real to the people who participate in it. And I think that, the spiritual. I don't know if that's. I think you're probably right. I kind of haven't really thought of it too much that way. I think for a lot of people, it's almost like the equivalent of just meditation, which I guess has a spiritual component to it, but just being able to kind of get outside and be sort of either in your own space or also, but then there's also like this a really, really strong social component to it too. I mean, that's what most runners will tell you, is that's way more fun doing it with a group of 5 people than it is sort of solo, and that's a part of that sort of had to fall away with everything that's happened the past several months. In terms of masks, we're the people on the team tend to run along. Our team tend to run along the Charles River, which is packed with runners, and so people are.
Those are narrow, pretty narrow sidewalks along there. Yeah,
they're narrow, and certainly it's the key place in Boston to run. It's a central place, and so they get pretty crowded, and so masks are part of it. But then now you're seeing research that says that if you wear a bandana and the bandana can actually turn your fine mist into like these little little COVID bullets, these coronavirus bullets that go outside. I mean, you know, it's we're just trying to pay attention to the science as best we can, and really follow the state and local restrictions on what to do and group activities. So it's I think
I mentioned to you on when we talked a couple of months ago, I went into the city. I've been quarantining in Connecticut, but I went into the city one morning to run in Central Park with a couple of my colleagues, and it was sort of like this bizarre choreographed ballet with a little bit of everything. People with masks glaring at people without masks, people passing really close, people giving really wide berth, people, you know, making passive aggressive remarks about other people's masks. It was a little bit of everything. And, you know, and that was just one slice of Central Park on one particular morning. I can imagine.
Yeah, it's like that captures America as a whole right now. It's just everyone has their own little their own solution and their own way to approach it. And yeah. It's.
But I guess some things about COVID are also that, you know, positive and silver linings, right? Is that the you know, some people are spending less time sitting on planes and, you know, trains and automobiles and commuting. So that's more time to be fit. That's more time to run. Some cities are rethinking the role of the automobile and, you know, the price we pay for having automobiles on every single street in every single city. And that, you know, just the you know, what we're doing to the planet, the sustainability, you know, sustainability and all of these things. So do you guys try to be thought leaders in some of those areas and speak to that?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of opportunity around running to talk about running as a form of urban mobility. Everything from commuting once we get back into a normal workflow to just sort of running out and doing errands. I think right now particularly in dense urban areas, it's the safest way to move about. It's certainly the greenest, and always has been the greenest. And there's also a lot of sort of emotional benefits when you know, running to point to work. And when you live in New York, run down the west side from, you know, upper Manhattan to lower Manhattan, or over one of the bridges from Brooklyn to Manhattan, and you get to see the city in a different way. You get to running point to point. It's always more fun than running in a loop because you feel like you actually got somewhere. So we're going to be making some product introductions around the idea of run commutes and as products are designed specifically to be able to be worn twice in a day. They're natural fibers that don't carry odor and can dry quickly and packs and things like that. I think there's a really interesting conversation to be had around that transport form, particularly as a lot of urban planners now are sort of rethinking the role of the car in cities that had already been happening, but now it's accelerating. And most urban planning is around two speeds, you know, walking speed or cycling speed for non-vehicular traffic. And I think there's a third way, which is sort of that in between space where runners tend to be. That's something that we want to start to really kind of explore a little bit more, because we think that there's a lot of benefit to the society as a whole that can come from it.
Yeah, super exciting. So can we talk a little bit more about your marketing funnel and what's working for you these days? You have a brand that I guess in some ways you're still building, right? And an image, and that's very carefully crafted with the logo and the look and feel and the you know, the symbolism behind it and the sensibility of it. So, but you also, as a business with only one bricks and mortar store, you're primarily direct to consumer and e-commerce focused and lower funnel focused. So I guess that makes it a full funnel approach that you got to think about all the time. And then there are lots of elements in maybe sticking more to things like social media, direct mail, you know, email, things like that. So can you talk a little bit more about what your funnel looks like lately, and maybe some best practices and some things that are working, some things that are surprising you, some things that are challenges.
Yeah, we're just starting to take a really close look at it. I mean, up until a couple of probably a few months ago, to be honest, maybe a year ago, we weren't spending a lot of money outside of search and social, and we were doing that sort of reluctantly. We sort of had the hypothesis that there were better ways to acquire customers. We've started to really invest in more brand awareness, top of funnel stuff. And I don't really like referring to the idea of a funnel. I don't think consumers think that or behave that in such a linear way, but
yeah,
it's the existing model, so we'll use it. But we're starting to invest more in building the brand and building brand awareness. We've had, through word of mouth, our brand has grown through word of mouth up until now, and the word of mouth has been fueled by, I think, the brand imagery that we create, the photography. We put a lot of care into how we do photo shoots, and how those shoots sort of conjure up and make people feel about the sport, and it really kind of creates a world that a lot of consumers find that they want to step into about whether it's a training camp in Vermont or running on some of the beautiful roads out in California. It's worked through word of mouth. So what we're really doing now is just thinking about how do we amplify that? How do we amplify the brand that exists across, and using sort of our content as our lead vehicle to do that.
Right.
And so we're finding that prestige media is something I've always believed in. That's working well for us. We have a content partnership with the New York Times right now. And the New York Times has already historically done a pretty good job of covering running, and I think that there's a lot of people out there who are, particularly in New York, who are extremely busy, and maybe they have time to read the New York Times every day, but that's maybe it. And so, and it might be, and there's certainly runners among those people. So we feel like it's a good way to reach people who maybe are too busy with everything that's going on right now to pay attention to maybe some of the more classical running kind of endemic publishing platforms like a Runner's World or something like that.
Can I ask what the Times is? It's the Times Brand Studio and
T Studios. Yeah.
Yeah. Are they, what are they doing for you? Are they making videos? Are they making, text content? What?
No, the concept we brought to them was to show how three New Yorkers fell in love with running. So one of them was Malcolm Gladwell. One was a woman named Mary Kane, who is actually a Tracksmith employee now. She was a world champion junior runner. She ran for Nike for years, and the New York Times had actually written a few, I think, cover stories about her and some of the challenges that she had at Nike. And a guy named Knox Robinson, who used to be editor of Fader magazine and has created and founded one of the run crews, which are the kind of the sort of less competitive, the running clubs that are less structured in New York, called Black Roses. So we had the New York Times essentially profile those people. We worked with a photographer named Ash Gilbertson, who's a war photographer and also a runner. He shoots for the Times to shoot the imagery, and it looked great. And so yeah, T Studios helped us pull that together, and we did that part of that too was also advertising on the Daily, and we had Malcolm Gladwell do the read for the Daily podcast,
right, and
a few other things. Yeah.
I'm seeing some pretty good questions, so I think I might, before I go to questions, I want to ask you one more time, Ryan. Is there anything coming up for Tracksmith that is going to happen this fall or next year that you guys are gearing up to launch or roll out that you want to talk about?
Oh man, yeah, we are. Well, I talked about Run Commute. There'll be some stuff around run commuting from us. The other activity that a lot of runners are really starting to kind of engage in more is just getting off the roads, getting onto trails, adventuring. like more back to like the idea of being less structured and not being as driven by your stopwatch and your workout goals, and more just about running because you love it and you want to go explore. So we're going to be introducing some products that are geared to that as well. Right. Yeah, you know, I think we're and some other things that that are in the works for sort of late this year, early next year, that, you know, I'm not ready to talk about yet, because being a small company, you never know where things go.
Yep, sure. Yeah.
So,
well, I love the concept of New Yorkers and what inspired them to run and what got them interested to run. That probably wouldn't have worked so well during the 1970s, because it would have been, well, because someone was chasing me. So make it.
Yeah, it's amazing in New York too. I mean, the running scene in New York has absolutely exploded the past several years. It's really become, it's a phenomenon. And I lived in New York for a while after college and ran for one of the clubs there, and I don't even recognize the running scene now when I go back, because it's exploded in such a major way, which is really cool to see.
Yeah, I remember. So I'll date myself. I'm running the New York Marathon for the first time in the mid '80s. Or late '80s, and it was when it was such a vibrant scene, and Fred LeBeau was still the guy, and that was a great time. So, can I go to a couple of questions?
Great, that sounds fun.
Okay, so this is from Michelle. She is from the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. They put on Team in Training, Big Climb, Light the Night are their big events. And she's asking, in the absence of IRL races and marathons, what are your suggestions for community experiences with fundraising elements in this dedicated running community?
I mean, virtual races are what's happening now. You know, we actually tried to put together one around COVID relief called the Perfect Mile. It was leaning into Roger Bannister's 4-minute mile, and the fact that Roger Bannister was a doctor who actually did his rounds in the hospital the day he ran that 4-minute mile. And so we partnered with a few other brands to raise some money for COVID relief, and it worked reasonably well. I wanted it to be a little bit bigger, but we raised quite a bit of money. And so, I mean, that's one thing. I think you're seeing, though, that virtual race area is getting really, really cluttered. And I think that some of the virtual races are trying to figure out how to differentiate themselves. And so I think it's also easy to get lost doing that too, and how to have your virtual, like what does a virtual race even mean, right? I think that people are trying to figure that out. Yeah, you know, I think it's a great question. I wish I had a better answer than that. I think that the one thing that has been really powerful about running, and probably maybe gets underreported, which is it's such a great fundraising tool, right? It for whatever reason, I think there's some interesting psychology around it, actually, that this idea that if you actually do something and I move and I exert myself, then people are willing to fundraise to support that. Yeah, you know, it's I shudder to think about all the organizations that depend on races to raise money, and now are struggling. Like, but yeah, I don't know. I'll try to think about that a little bit more. If I have any good suggestions, I can maybe get some contact information and ping somebody. It's a great question.
I would say still do the T-shirts, because the T-shirts are one of the best parts of it. You know, I used to have dozens of T-shirts from various 10Ks, and it's a great sort of collectible thing. Here's another question. Interested to hear if Ryan and his team are seeing a new consumer profile engaging in your brand these days.
Yeah, for us, we don't have like really great data on it. I mean, we but we believe we are. So we believe that we're starting to see more runners who are less sort of obsessed with running, and the way that we internally think about our segments are running obsessives who consume running media often, committed improvers who are really focused on their performance, but as I was saying earlier, they have incredibly busy lives, and they probably have kids or a job that demands a lot of their time and attention, and they probably perhaps they played another sport earlier in their life, and they came into running later. And then we have a third group, which we call culture-driven runners, who are driven by style and fashion. That second group, we believe, is finding their way to our brand. What we don't have a good sense of is how long they've been involved in the sport, and whether they're new to the sport or whether they've been runners for a long time and have just found their way to us. But we're seeing that just building sort of broad awareness of the brand is bringing us a new consumer who is still kind of identifies with the same brand values. So we've been able to do it without changing anything about who we are as a brand.
Right. Next question: what do you see as the biggest future challenge to retail and e-commerce, or the biggest opportunity?
I think retail specific. I think we're all trying to figure out what that looks like and how that rebounds. It's and how fast it rebounds. Short term, there's probably a lot of interesting real estate opportunities. Long term, though, we don't know what the consumer behavior is going to be. I think that there were a number of people who had probably defaulted to brick and mortar retail prior to COVID, and being forced into a different behavior, different shopping behavior, I think has maybe pushed some people over the edge of kind of defaulting to e-commerce. So they've had to grow comfortable with it. And so we think that we may have actually picked up, back to the earlier question, we may have picked up some customers from that as well, from traditional brick and mortar customers who don't have those options, or didn't have those options for several months. What was the other part of it? It was e-commerce, retail, and I feel like there's another piece of it, or...
Well, it was just, no, I think it was just
Is that it? Okay.
Yeah, I think that was just it. I mean, what about, are there any brands, I think we have 2 minutes left. Are there any brands, particularly e-commerce? I was actually going to ask this question as well, in the sports and maybe specifically in the running world or the shoe space, like the Swiss brand On. I don't know if you pronounce it On or On.
Yep, yeah. I think it's On. I don't know.
Yeah, who seem to have made a pretty big impact in a short period of time with a social commerce strategy. Like, are there things to learn there from those guys or other brands that you've been watching?
Yeah, I think they've certainly gained a lot of ground really quickly. I think Allbirds has also taken some just interesting approaches to design. I mean, I think from a footwear perspective, their design's distinct to be recognized an Allbirds shoe across the street without having a logo. And I think that's always been, from a kind of a design point of view, that's always been sort of the goal of any designer, right? How do I get my product recognized without using a logo as a crutch? But then they also have a really open-minded partnerships. They partnered with Adidas, and coming from that industry, I was at Puma for a while. It's pretty rare to see two footwear companies collaborate on things, and it shows a level of openness and transparency and sharing of best practices. With Allbirds, it was around sustainability and use of materials. That I think is interesting, and I think that's a really positive trend for the industry as a whole. The fact that these brands are becoming more open, doing more interesting things from a design perspective, and starting to push things forward in a way that hadn't been done for quite a few years.
Yeah, fascinating. Someone recently recommended the Phil Knight book, Shoe Dogs, to me. I assume you've read that.
I've read it. It's good.
Yeah, it's a great. I was just going to say it's one of the best business books I've read recently. I'd certainly recommend that to anybody. Maybe that's a segue into the next segment, because I think there's somebody from Nike coming up next. So, Kyla, are we out of time?
Yes, but thank you so much, Rob and Ryan. Awesome discussion, Ryan. I can really empathize with you in the running community. I'm down here in New York, and as you say, it's a very, very vibrant community down here. And I think with everything happening with COVID, I think everyone's getting outdoors and the gyms are still closed here like they are in a lot of other states. And, just last night we were down near the East River track here and it was packed, and so I think even sort of your traditional running community are finding it sort of hard to sort of, get their space and get their motivation, as you say. So, but no, I've often thought, like, what's winter going to look like? So I know that's something that's probably keeping you up at night at the moment.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But no, thanks very much, guys. Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, Rob. Great job on moderating. So we're over to our next session.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
So we have just a quick reminder before I introduce our next session to the audience. Please use hashtag BILivecast in any of your posts today.